Continue our discussion in the Gospel of John, chapter 7, which really is the beginning point to chapters 7, 8, 9, and 10 that go together. Before I start, though, I just want to share with you, so those of you who were at the barbecue last week, you might remember that I had trouble barbecuing. I had an issue with my grill. I just wanted you to know that I performed surgery. It went well. The patient's going to live to barbecue another day. It was actually a bad gas regulator, but it's all fixed, so we'll have to plan another barbecue. So this week's discussion takes place in Jerusalem with the Feast of Tabernacles. And if you've never been introduced to this idea, it's God's tabernacling in the desert with the Israelites, just like he will tabernacle with men once again. And he asks the Israelites to go camp, basically camp for a week. You know, go out in your backyard, put up a structure. Make sure, though, that you can see my stars, my heavens at night. It's a very, very wonderful festival with lights and water and all kinds of things. But it's camping, essentially. And so when doing some research on this, I came across something kind of funny. A quick search resulted in some letters from kids at camp. And, you know, kids don't always want to go to camp. At least that's my understanding. So here's camp letter number 1. I'm going to murder you guys when I get home. Well, you, Mom, because you did this to me. We had to take a stupid swim test. I know you said I would love it, but I will never. It's terrible. Love you. And please ask me next time so you don't waste $700 on me. Camp letter 2 from Australia. We have to do everything. Cook food, clean up, no lollies or lollipops. And we are locked up like prisoners. It's an interesting perspective, huh? When people pay money for this. Well, I sure hope that the Jews who sleep under the stars in their little booths or Sukkot, that they feel a lot better about the experience than the kids from camp. All right. After a brief review, let's go ahead and dive into things. So last week we really covered this idea of living water, living bread, of consuming Christ, making the gospel a part of who we are, right? It's decision time. We receive, we consume, hopefully, and in return, God gives us His Spirit. So we learned about this, and that eating and drinking the flesh and blood of Christ is a metaphor for believing. This is exactly what it is. There's no mystery. There's no huge religious overtones. It's very simple. Receive the gospel, make it a part of who you are, walk in the Spirit, and live. And so we kind of talked about those things last week. We also talked about the Father giving illumination and salvation to anyone who will receive and consume. I like it, actually, using that word, because it makes a lot more sense, I think, of things. So what about today? Well, Jesus is going to go from Galilee. Remember, he's been in Galilee all summer long. It's in the fall now, about October, and it's time to go back to Jerusalem. Now, he's in the north, heading south, but he's going up. Do you remember why? Elevation, yeah. So he's going to go up to Jerusalem for the Feast of Booths, and again, it's in October. So, by the way, it'll be October 2nd, I think, the beginning of this year. So, he's going there. And today we're going to talk more about this idea of living water and why there's so much contention in Jerusalem. So we have to remember that Jesus will be crucified in 5 to 6 months from this point. And so you see the tension is building. Every time he's gone down for Passover, 50 days later for Pentecost, and then for booths, right? We have this contention that's brewing. And why? So that at some point it'll just blow up, and it sets the stage for Christ's crucifixion and subsequent resurrection. So we're going to really dive more today into this idea of contention. All right, so here's some interesting points for you. So the Feast of Booths is a type and shadow. And those of you on Friday nights understand that this is basically something that's happened before that will be fulfilled in the future. Just like Jesus fulfilled this type of Passover lamb. Just like he and we are fulfilling the Jewish type of a betrothed couple. Just like he actually is fulfilling pieces of this Feast of Booths by being the light and the living water that's a part of that festival. But also, God is going to come one day. We talk about this blessed hope. A new age is coming where he will dwell with us, and that will be fulfilled. So also, it's interesting that you'll learn today that Jesus waited to go up to Jerusalem. And we'll talk about why, but he didn't go with his brothers. His brothers, I think, were being kind of snarky with him. And he kind of hung back and he went on his own, in his own particular idiom to make a grand entrance, but the way he needed to, moved by the Spirit. And then also, these religious Jews who were starting to get really angry at him, they want to kill him for breaking the law, right? You healed on the Sabbath. You need to die. But isn't plotting the murder of somebody also against the law? So we'll talk more about that today. So here's the purpose today. It is, I'm sure, to set up the contention, because chapters 7, 8, 9, and 10 all deal with Jesus in Jerusalem at the Feast of Booths and until the Feast of Dedication about 2 months later, which is in December, Hanukkah. Right? So from October-ish through December, Jesus is in Jerusalem. And he spends a lot of time with these guys, and the anger is just building. So when, again, Feast of Booths in the fall, and he's going to hang out for a couple of months, back in Jerusalem. So always keep in the back of your mind these angry Jews. He went to Passover, now he's starting to rub people kind of the wrong way, and that's where he meets Nicodemus back in the beginning. 50 days later, he goes to Pentecost. And he heals on the Sabbath, and he's really rubbing people the wrong way. You see this tension building. And now it's the Feast of Booths in the fall, and people are angry. The religious people are angry. And it really is setting up a firestorm here. And also, in particular, the last time, because Jesus said that he was equal to God, didn't he? He said, basically, I and the Father are the same. He abides in me, I abide in him. Well, they didn't like to hear this whole idea of equality, some kind of equality with God. All right, let's go ahead and dig in, starting with verses 1 to 9. After these things, Jesus was walking in Galilee, for he was unwilling to walk in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Remember, he's still in the north. Now the feast of the Jews, the Feast of Booths, was near. Therefore his brothers said to him, "Leave here and go into Judea, so that your disciples also may see your works which you are doing. For no one does anything in secret when he himself seeks to be known publicly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world." For not even his brothers were believing him. So Jesus said to them, "My time is not yet here, but your time is always opportune. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify that its deeds are evil. Go up to the feast yourselves. I do not go up to this feast because my time is not yet fully come." Having said these things, having said these things to them, he stayed in Galilee. So he hangs out in the north. It's a little bit longer. There's a good indication that he actually didn't come for the very beginning of the festival, but we don't know that yet, right? So again, Sukkot, which is the Hebrew word for it, which means booths. It's this Feast of Tabernacles, the Festival of Booths. And it happens 4 days after Yom Kippur. Again, it's going to happen on October 2nd this year. So what is that, about 4 months from now-ish? Something like that. And it really is to celebrate the harvest. You have 2 harvest times in Israel. The religious New Year ends up being in, Passover, essentially. But we also have now the Harvest Festival, like we do in the fall in a lot of cases. Fall Festival, sometimes Halloween, people would use that to celebrate the harvest in the fall. So this is a harvest festival, and it lasts for 7 days. What I'd like to do is read a description. This is not mine, but I thought it did a really good job, so I wanted to read this to you. A description of the booth that's used, and then also another purpose for this festival. So the sukkah, the singular form of sukkot, consists of 4 walls made of wood, canvas, or other material, kind of like a lean-to that doesn't really lean. The roof is made of branches or leaves thatched loosely so that one may glimpse the stars in the sky above. It is decorated with flowers, fruit, and paper chains. During the festival, Jews offer thanks to God for material blessings. They take refuge in the sukkah and recall the frailty, vulnerability, and transitory nature of human existence. Thus, they are called to reaffirm their ultimate dependence on God alone, instead of material goods for happiness and spiritual fulfillment. It actually sounds kind of neat. I wish we did the same thing. remember that there is no one but God who provides, who heals, who saves. And so if you separate yourself like this, and you live in a stick and canvas booth for a week, well, you might think to yourself, I'm really thankful that God's given me all those things that I'm going to get back in a few days. All right, so about Jesus' brothers. They didn't believe in him yet. I think they were mocking him because they said, if you do these things, you should go up. All right, isn't that what they said? Show yourself to the world. So why didn't Jesus want to go with his brothers? There are a couple of possibilities here. We don't know for sure. One possibility is, think about it. Why would Jesus go up with a gang of non-believers? Aren't you the people you associate with? That's the perception. You are who you associate with. So if Jesus had gone up with these non-believers, would that somehow perhaps damaged his credibility or diminished it? Maybe. We don't know. I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility. One word on Jesus' time, and then we'll go to the next verses. Those of you on Friday nights, you know that time is an interesting thing, where we have a year or a week of years, right? A week, or is it a day or an hour? We've kind of explored these things. Well, here we have an interesting variation in time. So Jesus says, my time has not yet come. But haven't we heard this before? And again in verse 30 we will. That his hour has not come. So here's the difference. I'll teach you a Greek word that you don't have to remember. I just want to help you understand. That the Greek word hora basically means a fixed time. So for example, when Jesus turned water into wine in chapter 2, verse 4, he said, woman, my hour has not yet come, right? Remember, it's an endearing term. And which means his hour, his time of crucifixion, this time when he is going to fulfill his mission has not come. In verse 30 of this chapter, we're going to read something very similar. But in this particular case, he's not using that to indicate it's not my time to go to Jerusalem. He's telling them it's not the right opportunity. It's a different word. It's kairos, time. Some of you might have heard this in time-making software, or time logging software. But it indicates a general season or an occasion, an opportunity. In fact, doesn't he use the word opportunity for his brothers? It's not my opportunity, it's not my time, but it's your opportunity. In other words, you go. He knows it's not the right time to go to Jerusalem, but that's not what he's referring to. He's not referring to his crucifixion at that point. Verses 10 through 14. But when his brothers had gone up to the feast, then he himself also went up, not publicly, but as if in secret. So the Jews were seeking him at the feast, and were saying, where is he? Now, there were a lot of reasons why they were seeking him. Again, they're getting angrier. Plus, there are a lot of them who probably really want to find him to learn. There was much grumbling among the crowds concerning him, and some were saying, he is a good man, and others were saying, no. On the contrary, he leads the people astray. Yet no one was speaking openly of him for fear of the Jews. These are the religious Jews. But when it was now in the midst of the feast, so after, say, 3 or 4 days, Jesus went up into the temple and began to teach. He could have been there for a couple of days, who knows? But in the middle of all this, he goes into the temple to teach. Now remember that these Jews are getting pretty stirred up. They're upset. He's equating himself to God in some fashion. There is no one like God. I can't believe he's doing this. He's claiming that he is the Son of God. He's claiming that he is the Messiah. Well, this is not how the Messiah is supposed to look. They're getting very angry at him and his teaching, and they think he's leading people astray. Now remember, there was another problem here as well. A few months before, at Pentecost, he healed a guy by the pool, right? Lame guy? I'm sure he wouldn't like to be referred to that way, but a lame gentleman. And Jesus healed him. And so they're upset about this. Maybe they're just looking for an excuse at this point. I'm just trying to set the stage, because this anger is going to continue to build until it boils over in a few more months with the crucifixion and the following Passover. All right, verses 15 through 20. The Jews were astonished, saying, how has this man become learned, having never been educated? It's interesting they would assume this. So Jesus answered them and said, my teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. If anyone is willing to do his will, he will know of the teaching, whether it is of God or whether I speak from myself. Remember, the Scriptures, the Father, the Baptizer, they will all testify to the deity and the legitimacy of Jesus. He who speaks of himself seeks his own glory, but he who is seeking the glory of the one who sent him, he is true, and there is no unrighteousness in him. Verse 19, did not Moses give you the law, and yet none of you carries out the law? Why do you seek to kill me? The crowd answered, you have a demon. Who seeks to kill you? So a lot of them don't realize that the religious Jews really are after Jesus to kill him. So here's an interesting statement. Jesus said, my teaching is not mine, but his who sends me. It's important to understand in rabbinical tradition that you can't claim that it was your own teaching. So in other words, you can't say, well, I'm Rabbi Jonah, Bar, whatever, and I say this, without accrediting it to somebody else. Like in college, if I quote somebody, I have to say who said it. I can't just spew stuff and not say. Well, this is a rabbinical practice as well, to make sure that somebody isn't lifting themselves up, and it really shouldn't be. So this is why Jesus points this out. And in verse 19, we see that the Jews are trying to kill Jesus, and that they're breaking the law. So here's a question for you. They said that Jesus broke the law of the Sabbath, right? No work on the Sabbath, but you healed somebody. That's the issue there. So we actually have two main issues going on here. That and equating himself with the Father. But what if a young boy who is 8 days old, his 8th day falls on the Sabbath, and he needs to be circumcised? Well, they have to circumcise him. So what's better? What's worse? Circumcising a young boy on the 8th day if it's on the Sabbath, right? Wouldn't that be breaking the law? We're actually making someone whole on the Sabbath. Jesus is going to address this. Let's go to verses 21 to 24. Jesus answered them, I did one deed, and you all marvel. For this reason Moses has given you circumcision, not because it is from Moses, but from the Father. Remember, Moses was just sort of a mouthpiece, a proxy. And on the Sabbath, you circumcise a man. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses will not be broken, are you angry with me because I made an entire man well on the Sabbath? Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. This is very critical. We'll spend a moment on that. So first of all, the miracle that Jesus is talking about, I think one thing, was this healing of the lame gentleman, at the pool of Bethesda. And so regarding this in verses 22 to 23, Jesus is saying, well, what's better? What's worse? Honoring the law of circumcision by breaking the Sabbath, or making someone whole, healing them on the Sabbath. So by the law, they may be both breaking it, but what is right? Jesus is saying this, and this is really the first introduction to this concept. Didn't Jesus spend a lot of time saying things like, you have heard it said, but I tell you. You have heard it said, you shall not murder. But I tell you that anyone who intends to murder has done the deed, right? It's justified. So Jesus is really starting to get to the heart of the problem. He's starting to get to the intent, the heart, the mind. This is where it all begins. And so the same thing is here. Don't judge by outer appearances. Get to the heart of the issue. What's the heart of the issue? I'm healing one of God's creatures. Why do you want to kill me for doing that? So don't judge by appearances. And I think the same thing should hold true to all of us. Don't judge by appearances. Listen, consider, take in before we form opinions and judgments, to make sure that we have all the information we need, and then respond wisely. Don't just judge instantly at what we see or hear without inquiry. All right, verses 25 to 33. Sorry, before we continue, I just want to also say this idea of judgment. This is an interesting thing, and I think I've said it before. In the church, it's very common for people to say, who am I to judge? I'm not sin-free, I can't judge. Who am I to judge? But the truth is, and Jesus iterates this several times, we are to judge one another. Not harshly, not for punishment, but we are to provide discipline. Matthew chapter 18 is a huge example of this. Paul with the Corinthian church, a great example. So we are to judge, but we are to judge righteously. It is love if I see one of you or experience one of you practicing a behavior that is contrary to God's ways. Wouldn't it be love for me to come and approach you in private and say, this is what I've noticed. Here's what God says about this. How may I help? Would you agree? That's love. Some might say, well, you're judging. Don't shoot the messenger, right? Now, I would expect you to do the same thing with me. Hey, Ron, you're doing some false teaching up there. Or, hey, Ron, you've been slacking on killing the weeds in the parking lot, or something, right? Talk to me. It's okay. We are to judge one another with righteous judgment. All right, verses 25 to 33. So some of the people of Jerusalem were saying, "Is this not the man whom they are seeking to kill? Look, he is speaking publicly, and they are saying nothing to him. The rulers do not really know this is the Christ, do they? However, we know where this man is from, but whenever the Christ may come, no one knows where he is from." Then Jesus cried out in the temple, teaching and saying, "You both know me and know where I am from, and I have not come of myself, but he who sent me is true, whom you do not know." It's quite a scathing accusation. "I know him because I am from him. He sent me," referring to the Father. So they were seeking to seize him, and no man laid his hand on him, because his hour had not yet come. This is the Korah, the specific occasion, in this case, the occasion of his crucifixion to come. But many of the crowd believed in him, and they were saying, "When the Christ comes, he will not perform more signs than those which this man has, will he?" The Pharisees heard the crowd uttering these things about him, and the chief priests and the Pharisees sent officers to seize him. Therefore Jesus said, "For a little while longer I am with you, and then I go to him who sent me." So again, Jesus is associating himself to the Father. I came from the Father. I came from the heavenlies. I'm the one whom the prophets have written. They don't like this. Again, he doesn't look like the Messiah should look. They're looking for somebody to come in and root up the Romans and start this everlasting kingdom. And again, it's not time yet. He keeps slipping away because it's not time for him to be seized and arrested and put to trial. That will come in about 5 to 6 months at the Passover feast in March-ish. I keep saying ish because it changes every year. With the sighting of the new moon, right? At the first of the religious new year. All right, verses 34 to 36. "You will seek me and will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come." So the Jews then said to one another, "Where does this man intend to go, that we will not find him? He is not intending to go to the dispersion among the Greeks and teach the Greeks, is he? What is this statement that he said, 'You will seek me and will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come'?" It is obvious that these guys don't understand who Jesus is, they don't understand his role, and they don't even understand the Father. They really don't understand the true nature of the Father they claim to worship. It's really very, very interesting. And so it allows them to really come up with interesting ideas about Jesus. He's not the Messiah. He's speaking falsely. He's blaspheming, when really he's not. So here's a thing too. Where was Jesus from, really? Where was he born? Bethlehem. Okay. But see, these guys don't know this. Why? They don't know the Scriptures. They don't know who Jesus is. They know that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. But they don't know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Where do they think he was born? Nazareth, yes. Why? Because, well, they know who this guy is. They lived him in the north since he was probably 25 or 26 years. I mean, for 25 or 26 years. So to them, they say, hey, this is just kind of an uneducated field worker guy from the north, from Nazareth. So why does he say these things? All right, verses 37 to 39. "Now on the last day, the great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, 'If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. And he who believes in me, as the Scripture said, from this innermost being will flow rivers of living water.' But this he spoke of the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. For the Spirit had not yet been given, because Jesus was not yet glorified." When would he be glorified? At his resurrection. So this is the living water, and I love this because Jesus keeps coming back to this idea. I am the one who can give you eternal life. That's really what he's saying. You need water and you need bread. This is how you are sustained. I can give you that. It will keep you alive forever. And it's just terms that they understand. And so this living water, this heavenly water that he brings, And the Spirit that is given as a result, when we consume this, it regenerates us. And we are to become new creatures in Christ. This is the way it works, in a very simple manner. I mean, it's not rocket science. But they're having difficulties with this. And I think that we do too. It's really hard for us to understand sometimes this idea of Christ bringing this living water and the bread of heaven and how it sustains us forever. Simply consume, walk by the Spirit you're given. Let's see. Enough on that. I do want to bring in Isaiah because he foretells of this living water, the Christ. And I'm going to read from Isaiah 55:1. Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come and buy and eat. Come and buy wine and milk without money and without cost. That sounds really familiar, doesn't it? Isaiah is predicting this coming Christ, the Messiah, the one who would bring living water, the one who would bring this ability for eternal life. Well, let me read to you from Revelation. Revelation 22, 1 through 2. Then he showed me a river of the water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God and of the Lamb, in the middle of its street. This is in the new age to come, when God dwells amongst us. On either side of the river was the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. So we just see all kinds of fulfillment, don't we? Isaiah spoke it back, and if I remember correctly, in the 6th century BC. And Jesus and our Heavenly Father are fulfilling it. And I keep talking about consumption, by the way. Consuming the living water, consuming the bread of heaven. How do we do this? So I want to bring this in practical terms just for a moment. We're not going to turn this into a discipleship lesson, but I just want to remind us that it isn't a matter of listening to my voice. I appreciate that you're here listening, but that alone isn't going to do anything for you. But here's how we consume, or receive and consume the gospel. We hear with our ears, a preacher, an evangelist, a teacher. We see with our eyes. What do we see? We see witnesses. I see you. You see me. You see each other. We see witnesses. But witnesses to what? But those things we can learn from. This is why fellowship and assembly is so important, so that we can have eyeballs on each other, right? Not for punishment or discipline. I'm talking about to learn, to grow. If we have good relationships and we're meeting often, I get to see how I get to understand how you speak. I get to see your speech in action. I get to see your integrity. I get to learn from you. And I can learn from every one of you. So I hear the things of God. I see the witness of others, and I read the text, just like you've done in preparation for today. We hear, we see, we read, we experience, and we apply. And it's that application that's really important. That's how it becomes a part of us. One last thing on this, and then we'll move on. As a teacher, I know that I can tell you something, but until you practice it, it doesn't really become a part of you. And any one of you who's a professional, and I think probably every one of you has been, you understand this. Somebody tells you something, you read something in a book, somebody teaches you something, and you practice it, whether it's typing, speaking, troubleshooting, engineering stuff, right? You don't just hear and go, yeah, I'm an engineer. It has to become a part of you. This is how we consume. We receive it, we consume it through meditation and prayer and consideration, and we walk in that. And by walking in those things, by making them a part of who we are, it just becomes a part of our nature. And then we don't have to think about it anymore. That's the plan anyway. All right, verses 40 to 43, division. Some of the people, therefore, when they heard these words, were saying, this certainly is the prophet. Others were saying, this is the Christ. Still others were saying, surely the Christ is not going to come from Galilee, is he? Has not the Scripture said that the Christ comes from the descendants of David, from Bethlehem, the village where David was? So a division occurred in the crowd because of it. Man, the church is fracturing, and it hasn't even started. So in verse 40, we see something interesting about the prophet. Where did we see this before? Jesus is in Samaria, right? He's on his way back up north. And he stops in Samaria. He's at the well. And he says to this girl, yeah, in fact, I know you. This is not your husband. In fact, he tells her a little bit about herself. What does she say to him? "Sir, I perceive that you are the prophet." Why? Because they're waiting for this prophet, this one who would be like Moses. So we see this again. This gives us a glimpse into first century Judaism. The guy they're waiting for, the person they're looking for. Verses 41 and 42 show us just how confused they were. They didn't know their own scriptures, or if they knew the words, they hadn't applied yet what they had heard from Jesus, or his testimony, his witness, or the miracles. So they just weren't getting it. They know that the Messiah is going to come from Bethlehem, but Jesus comes from Nazareth, they think, because they don't know where he was born. By the way, kind of an interesting tidbit. Jesus is our bread of life, right? Jesus was born in Bethlehem. So here's the name, the town Bethlehem. This is why it's called that. It actually is Bethlehem. So you notice I don't speak Hebrew very often, not enough phlegm. Bethlehem, which means house of bread. So it's really very, very appropriate that Jesus our Christ was born in the town named House of Bread. He would become our living bread, the bread of heaven, right? Bread of life. I just thought I'd help you understand that all these things work together. All right, so the last bit today is verses 44 through chapter 8, verse 1. Some of them wanted to seize him, but no one laid hands on him. You know, I haven't been flipping the slides, have I? Oh, you really need a new preacher. All right. Some of them wanted to seize him, but no one laid hands on him. And the officers then came to the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they said to them, "Why did you not bring him?" And the officers answered, "Never has a man spoken the way this man speaks." And the Pharisees then answered them, "You have not also been led astray, have you? None of the rulers or Pharisees has believed in him, has he? But this crowd, which does not know the law, is accursed." Nicodemus, he who came to him before, being one of them, since when he came to the Passover, said to them, "Our law does not judge a man unless he first hears from him and knows what he is doing, does it?" And they answered him, "You are not also from Galilee, are you? Search and see that no prophet arises out of Galilee." Again, they just do not understand. And now they're giving Nicodemus a hard time. Remember, Nicodemus was the teacher of Israel. This is the guy, and they're giving him a hard time. But he really has kind of stepped up, hasn't he? Chapter 8, verse 53. Everyone went to his own home. Chapter 8, verse 1. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. So a couple of things. I love that Nicodemus has really stepped up here. And it seems that he is becoming a friend of God, if nothing else, to make sure he is a righteous man, that he judges righteously, that he's fair. Because this is what God has called us to do. What does God desire of you, O man? Right? I think it's Micah chapter 6, verse 6. That you love justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Right? This is what Nicodemus is doing. But I suspect he also is really starting to come around. And he ends up being an integral part of Jesus' story. So now you're wondering, why did you include the verse first? You're supposed to stop it at the end of the chapter. What is wrong with you? Well, there were no chapter divisions. There were no verse divisions. In fact, there was very little punctuation back in the day. It's true. It really, as the way the tradition holds, some monk on a donkey several hundred years ago, probably writing like this, the back of a donkey, trying to put dots and tittles and crossing T's and question marks and verse and chapter numbers. Well, he didn't actually do a very good job in some cases. Why? Because it interrupts the flow. And we see it here. Everyone went home, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. That's a good stopping point. So we'll stop at 8 verse 1. Context rules. It does. Chapters and verse numbers are good. But make sure you keep the story intact. It's really important. All right, let's go ahead and sum this up and get you guys off to lunch. The Feast of Booths, this Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, right, which is plural sukkahs, the little booths, it will be fulfilled finally when God comes to tabernacle with us. This is what we look to. However, in the meantime, we know that our Christ came for a time to tabernacle with us. And he's left us the Spirit, which really tabernacles with us, dwells, right? I think those are good things to think about. Jesus on earth, in his ministry, also fulfilled the water and the lights parts of the rituals, which are part of the festival, by exclaiming at the right time, "I am the light of the world," at the last of this festival when the lights are being lit. And with the water rituals, "I am living water." So it's no accident. It's not like Jesus just decides randomly to say things like, "I'm the light of the world." There's a reason for this. They're seeing this, and he's telling them, "I am the fulfillment of these things. I am the light. I am the water." To try to help them go from the known to the unknown. He's trying to teach them. He's a good teacher. They're just not always listening. The religious Jews wanted to kill Jesus, so far for two main reasons. He equates himself with Jesus, even though they're sure that, hey, he can't be the prophet because, well, he's from the north, he's from Galilee. And they're wrong. But also because he healed on the Sabbath. I think at this point they're just looking for an excuse now. They don't like that the people are starting to like this guy. And they're starting to align themselves with Jesus. They're starting to become his disciples. They don't like this. Lastly, in summary, please always think about this idea of consuming the living water, living bread. And by that, I mean the gospel that you've received, make it become a part of you. Contemplate, meditate, pray. Receive illumination by the Spirit of God. And every step you take, in life, at home, whatever, put that to work so that it becomes a part of who you are. All right. The challenge today. We all need challenges. Ponder this. If the Feast of Tabernacles is about God abiding with us, already in Jesus, does he abide or remain in you? Is he abiding with me? Am I abiding with him? This is kind of a harsh question to ask yourself, because Jesus is going to go into detail in a few chapters, I promise, about what this means. And we either are or we are not. We are either in step with the Father by the Spirit or we are not. So, do I remain in him? If not, why not? It's a great question to ask. And you don't have to tell anybody the answer if you don't want to. But ask the question.